If you are here, you wish to know. Welcome to What's News This Week, a weekly series where I speak about different releases that I found interesting so I could keep up and you also don't miss out on new video game releases and stuff to watch. The first thing we're gonna talk about today is Starfire: The Turnout Cycle, which is a roguelike where you play as an anime girl and you walk from left to right and beat up all kinds of different enemies and use different upgrades. This roguelike and different costumes have different elements like in Mega Man, and the battle system is different depending on what you choose, so that adds to variety, and that can be fun. Little Problems, a cozy detective game, so instead of making a case about theft and murder and stuff, it's just like a simple detective where you just trying to figure out who broke the mark inside of a house, who could it be, and I have a detective but about simple things, without any crime and drama. Katanaut, it's a pixel art game when you astronaut with a katana, that's a wordplay, and you on a space station and fight against cosmic horrors. I'm sure you saw some necromorphs here and there in this pixel art versions of enemies. Yes, and it seems dynamic, and there's a giant amount of weapons and skills and builds, so it's have a giant amount of variety, surely. LootMage seems like Legend of Zelda-like, where you, in this pixel art world, will travel around and, I suppose, find loot in a dungeons, and you playing as a mage, but you also can wield a sword. Chrono, Warden of Time. So they made another Hololive related indie game. This time it's not a Vampire Survivors clone, and the main character is Crony that will travel around, meet with different characters of Hololive, and not only, and fight with them. I suppose it's gonna be something like Mamadora, which I never played, but it's like similar, I suppose. Is it part of a lore that Crony is fighting with Laplace? I'm not sure. Really don't is new Ethan Coen movie without his brother this time, I suppose. Usually they're making crime strangers in fiction, like Fargo and anything related to Fargo. Yeah, and this time Chris Evans is leader of a cult, and the main character is a woman detective that will solve crime, and there's gonna be like something strange happening while the detective will try to figure out what's happening in this cult with Chris Evans in the leader, and it may be something fun. And unfortunately, that's all I found interesting this week. So if you have the channel to live and grow, please support me here on all social medias, share my videos when you think worth sharing, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos. Bye!